Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul, for the opportunity. And I also thank the organizers for considering bringing in Agricultural Development Organization. I use also the opportunity to recognize Professor Joachim von Braun, who served as a long board member for my organization and for his contribution to agricultural development in the continent. So I'll move straight to the presentation here. Again, this is the benefit of speaking last, because some of these areas have been largely covered by the other speakers. As said previously, our continent is among those continents that are largely affected by climate change, despite the fact that the contribution to the global warming is very limited. As you could see the map, which is not very different from what Kenneth presented, 17 out of 20 countries in Africa are threatened by climate change. As the governor said from Kenya, most of the countries they are spending between 2 and 9% of their national budget to mitigate and adapt to the climate change consequences. This is a recent report by UNECA. Coming back to agricultural perspective, although we always say that the continent is blessed by a huge potential for irrigation, but it's a missed opportunity that we're not exploiting it. Currently, it's only 6% of the total arable land, agricultural land, that is equipped with irrigation infrastructure. Imagine if we can, upgrade that, probably 20, 30%, the difference that it can make. In this year, 2024 alone, again, that comes to what has been discussed before, we're seeing two different contrasts in the continent as far as climate change is concerned. In the Southern Africa, we're seeing a huge drought spell going on, cutting across Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique, Angola, the whole countries, which are currently receiving less than 20% of expected rainfall. And this is an impact of the El Nino in the region. On the other side, when you look at East Africa, countries are being flooded. Joyce has just presented the case of Kenya. Currently, reports from OIM shows that over 634 households have been affected, including 250 that have actually been displaced. I was 10 days ago in the Southern Africa, in Zambia and Zimbabwe, and all those states have just declared the state of emergency because of the drought. In Zambia alone, almost 50% of the population, 9.8, are currently being affected. And you can imagine the amount of money that the government is going to pump in this year. Now, to bring all this conversation down to the community, down to the villages, how are different governments coping with the impact of climate change to the local communities, vulnerable communities? I chose to use a case study of ecosystem restoration in eastern province of Rwanda, where I come from. This is a program that was aiming at building resilience for poor population with the aim to reduce poverty, but also increasing food security and income for the population. So back then, that was 2010, we looked at this whole northern west part of the country, which is a very highland area with excessive rainfall that used to have every year issues of water erosion, landslide, floods downstream, leading to serious impact to vulnerable communities. Government brought in a team of experts, which I used to lead then, and asked about finding a long-lasting solution for this food basket region of the country. And what has happened back then, this is a period where the country was going through the war, if you may recall, back in the 90s up to 2000 and plus. So there have been almost 20 years of carelessness in management of that particular fragile ecosystem. So almost 90% of the vegetation and forest cover was removed. This whole area was invaded by vulnerable communities, most of them being internally displaced people, and others being refugees from returning in the country from Eastern DRC. And all of that has led to a drastic change on the land use, coupled with the climate change. And so many people lost their life by landslides, by erosion, and also by flooding downstream. When we designed this program, this is how the catchment was looking for. It's a huge area of close to 7,000 hectares, which was populated by close to 10,000 families. And as a result of that overpopulation on a very fragile ecosystem, there was a recurrent landslide, water erosion, flooding, a huge decline in fertility, but also a scarcity in terms of fodder and wood deficit. And you can imagine the impact on the local communities. So government took a bold decision to actually commission very detailed studies to come up with a new land use plan. This is a work I was leading back in 2010. And the idea was to reclaim and restore and rehabilitate that particular fragile ecosystem. And in 2009, we came up with an inter-ministerial program bringing in agricultural, environment, land, local government, gender and inclusion ministries to bring about a program that would rehabilitate that particular fragile ecosystem. The objective was really to make sure that we harmonize the healthy coexistence between the agrarian communities with that particular ecosystem, because there was no other place to relocate those particular communities. And the program also had an objective of maximizing sustainable economic contribution of the water catchment to the communities, leading to their improved way of living. Now, what we did back then was to go back and carry out a very detailed field surveys and analysis and studies to design a new land sensitivity map, looking at the areas that are suitable for crop production, areas that are suitable for rangeland development, but also areas that are not suitable for human settlement that could be used for forest regeneration. And this was followed by a relocation of the population that were living in very high-risk areas to low-risk areas, and therefore start undertaking comprehensive land husbandry work on the cropland, but also on the rangeland, including designing new waterways, silt management systems, but also establishing drainage in the command area to mitigate about the flood. And therefore, starting also a reforestation and a forest regeneration in areas that were qualified as high risky. If you look at these series of pictures here on the left side, we use the very same communities that were displaced to that land to actually reclaim the same catchment. I recall back then using over 5,000 people every day to undertake works on terracing, waterways construction, and so on and so forth. And you could see on the left side how the same catchment transformed in a period of 2 years. On the same land of livestock development, you could see also using the same communities to plant grasses and so on and so forth. And therefore, the same land was actually redistributed to the same communities for use up to date. And this was leading to a very large-scale land terracing, pasture development, afforestation, and natural forest development. So this particular picture here shows, again, the same area. After stabilizing the area, we did a huge and large-scale campaign, mobilizing communities in terms of erosion control, water management, and even maintenance of very fragile areas when it comes to agricultural development. Like my colleague from China here talked about, we also use the military to undertake such large-scale community mobilization, because this was becoming also a national security issue. Because some of these communities affected by erosion and landscape were fleeing back to DRC, creating a series of conflicts. The picture on the right side of the slide is actually how the landscape was transforming 2.5 years after the program development. So what also happened was, now, after the area was developed, we brought back the same communities and they redistributed the land that was suitable for agricultural development, but also the land that was suitable for livestock development. And most importantly was to make sure that we are mobilizing and training farmers on how do they deploy sustainable farming systems on a fragile environment such as such ecosystem, including issues to do with the crop rotation, optimum grazing systems, leading to improved productivity, but also poverty alleviation. So I looked at back then, 2 years down the road after the project started just one value chain that was being promoted then. These are some of the varieties that my organization has helped develop. Just in 2 years' time, following the land terracing, liming, erosion control, and so on, actually productivity for some of those crops were increasing up to 70%. And I went back 2 years ago. This is now almost 10 years after the program was developed. This was 2021. And this is how the area looks like. So what I'm saying here in terms of concluding message is that it takes really, to address some of these issues we're talking about in this room, we can develop tools, we can develop models, we can develop innovations as development organization, but it takes government board decision to actually make it happen. Scaling is not done by development organization. Scaling is actually done effectively by a national government. In this case, we just brought the models, the studies, and the maps, and so on, but the government took the board action to deploy its own resources to reclaim this particular land, because there was no option of relocating those communities to somewhere else. Number two, you have to leverage on a strong participation of the local communities and the local leaders, including even leveraging on local knowledge. Like my colleague was saying here, there is a lot that farmers know. What they need is probably empowering them, equipping them, and leveraging on what they know to achieve the program objective. And lastly, beside building resilience of these communities, a well-structured landscape restoration initiative such as this one will actually lead to multiple other benefits, including ensuring food security for people, reducing poverty, even improving livelihood for vulnerable communities. Today, this area supplies the biggest cities in the country with potatoes and livestock. When I went there, this is the last picture I took of the rangeland area, which used to be completely degraded, and this is how it looks today. Thank you for listening.